What's up, everybody? Welcome back to this 2 minute tip, and this is part 3, and we're talking about ISO. Okay, thank you very much for coming back. First of all, just like to say a big apology about taking so long to get part 3 of this 3-part little episode done for you. Basically, I did do this before, the audio didn't record, so I've had to go about doing other things and just had to get back to doing this when I can, with uni and doing bits and bobs here and there. That's basically why it's been so long, but let's just go back into it now. And a quick recap of what we've gone over with shutter speed, with that being the amount of light that your camera lets into the sensor. We talked about aperture, which is the amount of light that your lens allows through it to your camera. And now we're going to be talking about ISO, which is fundamentally the sensitivity of your camera's sensor. So when we talk about ISO, we're talking about numbers as well. And ISOs generally range from 100 to 6400, and they can go to 12,800, they can go all the way to 100,000, depending on the age of your camera, and the level of camera that you're buying as well. So if you're looking at more of the professional style cameras, DSLRs is what I'm really talking about right now, and some of the mirrorless ones as well, you can talk about having really high ISO ranges. But because I'm trying to aim this at people just beginning out, and we're going to run through a few little ISO examples, and I want to show you really what ISO settings do to the photographs that you're taking. So I'm not going to beat around the bush with this one. I want to keep it nice and quick, and I just want to show you actually when you're changing that ISO setting when it comes to your exposure and formulating your exposure from the triangle, what the effect ISO is going to have on your images. So bearing that in mind, let's quickly run onto the computer and have a look in Lightroom at some of the images that I've taken, and I can then explain to you there how the ISO is affecting the images that we're taking. Right. Okay, so right now we are in Lightroom and we are looking at pretty much a blank screen. Let me just get the information up on here. Try the develop module. There we go. Right, so you can see that I've used a 60th of a second here, f-stop 4.0, and ISO is 100mm. Just using my standard kit lens that ranges from 3.5 to 5.6 as a smallest aperture, and I'm just going to take you to my last image. Here you go. Just want to reset that. And this last image is basically what we've taken a picture of. I'm going to run right back to the first image again, and what we're here doing is looking at ISO 100. That's normally in a lot of the newer cameras. Some do only go down to 200 depending on the standard of camera you're using or age. And what we're looking at here is pretty much just a black wall. This is my bedroom shelf. There's supposed to be a shelf, some cameras, some picture frames, and some fairy lights. You can just about make out the fairy lights coming through around the picture frames. So we already know that we have an ISO setting that is far too low. So then we need to bump it up. So what I've done there is doubled it and gone to ISO 200. Still nothing has come up. So the ISO here is affecting my image by not being sensitive enough to allow more light to hit the sensor. So then I've gone to ISO 400, and now you saw a slight change in that image as I went across. So if I just jump back a bit, you can start to see a little bit of outlines coming, it's a bit more bright coming from the light as well. So you can now see that at 400 the camera's sensor is working a bit more. It's trying to pull more detail out of what's in front of it to give you an exposure, but it's still not enough. So now I've gone up one more and I've gone to ISO 800, and now I'm starting to see some outlines of the images that I'm supposed to be looking at. I can just make out the shelf, the picture frames, where my wall begins, where my window is. You can see a little bit of that, but it's still not enough to give me a decent view of what I'm supposed to be looking at. So we've gone up to ISO 1600. Now we can start seeing some light. You can see just light on the right hand side here. So around here you can see my computer's screen a little bit. You can really see a lot of colour coming off of the lights now. You can see the outline of everything here. You can see where my window is. You can see the wall, and you can see the distinction between the wall and the ceiling as well. So at 1600 ISO, we're starting to get a lot of detail coming through. So we've had to go up another stop of ISO as well. So we're now at 3200, and with that we can really start seeing what we're looking at. So now we know that we're getting enough lighting to actually distinguish what this image is supposed to be of. It's not the best composed image at all. It's just, I knew it would be a really poor quality lighting, so that I could give you the best example possible of how ISO could affect the image you're taking. So ISO 3200, we're starting to see everything a lot better, but it's still a little bit dark around the edges, and if the fairy lights weren't switched on, you'd feel like it would still be a lot darker. So then we're just going to bump it up one more stop, and there we go. We're looking at something now that we can distinguish every elements of the image. So it's a bit better, but this is where bumping up your ISO sensitivity is going to affect your image. So with ISO, it can show us the setting a lot better by putting more sensitivity to the actual sensor of your camera. But the downside of that is, if you look on this left hand side here where my mouse is going, if I just bear with me a minute, if I just come in here, you can see all this shouldn't be it just shouldn't be showing up. This is what we call the noise. So it's camera noise. It's because the sensor is picking up as much light and trying to draw out as much detail as possible. It's actually like breaking up the image a little bit. And when you zoom into here, you see the same again. What I really should have done is shown you this exposed correctly without noise. But in hindsight, I'm thinking should have done that now. But if you go back to the first image, because the sensor's not doing anything, I'm going to zoom into the exact same spot, and in the black you don't see anything. It's because it's not trying to draw out as much detail of the image. So you can see in the last one here, because it's darker, you're getting slightly less, as you can see. And then if we go down again, and if I just draw that back up, you might not be able to see the actual details as clear, and it might not be as bright, but the noise that's inside of that is actually a lot less, because it's a lot less sensitive to all the other elements of the picture. So when you're taking your image and trying to expose correctly, thinking about how the ISO is going to affect the quality, because it's not going to affect the overall sharpness. The image will still be sharp where you focused. I believe I focused here somewhere. I believe it was around here. But as you can see, that here where the Ilford film box is, it's still very sharp. The lines are straight. You can clearly read what's on there. I mean, you can still read what's on some of these tickets at the top as well. So it's not a question of sharpness being affected. It's the overall quality of the image that's being affected. If you wanted to print this out, it would not look very good printed out. It doesn't look very good on your computer screen. It's because the sensor is working overtime, try and compensate for the lack of light that's in the actual room. Right, so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the image quality being affected. So when you're taking your image and for instance, how we talked about how the aperture can affect your depth of field and how much of a shutter speed you can use, and that, then that's how your aperture will affect things. And then when you talk about changing your shutter speed settings to whether or not you capture a moment still or the movement in that image, and those are the different effects you can have there with your shutter speed. It's the same with the ISO. You can bump up your ISO so that you can get more light into the sensor and make it more sensitive, but at the same time you also have to compensate with the quality of the image that you're going to be producing. So always bear that in mind. Your ISO is probably the last thing that you really want to change. You want to keep it as low as possible on whatever camera you're using, just so you get the best quality image that you possibly can. It's a really good starting point in your photography, especially as a beginner, to really understand how the ISO settings are going to affect your image when you get home. Come sit down at the computer, whack it on, have a look on a bigger screen than the back of your camera, because on the back of your camera it's going to look half decent because it's such a small screen, everything's compressed. So just think about that, because you want to start using your manual settings, you want to start controlling everything you do about taking your image and exposing your image to the way that you want it to look. So in a beginner style, really think about trying to keep your ISO as low as possible, changing it when you really have to, and focusing more so on how you're going to use your aperture and your shutter speed to really capture that moment. Your ISO setting, keep it to last. That's my advice for you. Only because I want you to have the best quality images, because we're in a social media state now where everything we do has gone online. We don't print so much, so unless you like that grainy effect and you're going for it, as a lot of old school film camera users would like to use that grainy effect, unless you're really going for that sort of style and image, then go for it, bump up your ISO, use it to your advantage, use it to your style. But if you're looking for a really nice clean image that you might want to do a few tweaks to here and there, little things like that, then keep your ISO down, keep it as low as you possibly can, and give yourself the best starting point in your image. I'm going to leave it at that because we can talk about it all day. Any questions, comments, put them down below. And as always, if you like what I'm doing, just like, subscribe, leave me a comment. If you want me to do something different, something you want me to talk about, then go for it. Just leave me a comment and we'll see where we go next. I'm Kullar. These are our 2-minute tips. See ya.